I'm really delighted to be here tonight. I am going to tell you a story which I hope in these trying times will inspire you. And it is also a story about a fire. I'm going to turn this over now. There we go. This is a picture of Washington Roebling, the man who built the Brooklyn Bridge, as it says on the cover of my book. But not just any picture. It's the picture which I've carried in my wallet since I was 19 years old. I'm 49 now, in case you were wondering. It was taken in 1861 when Washington, at the age of 24, had just joined the Union Army. When I was still a teenager, I photocopied it from a book in the New York Public Library. I covered it with sticky tape, and I made a little envelope to hold it in. W-A-R is Washington's initials. Washington Augustus Roebling. My full name is Erica Augusta Wagner. Make what you will of that. Here's Washington in 1864. Not long before he left the army, after 4 years hard fighting in the American Civil War, one of the most dreadful wars the world has ever seen. But that war was only one of the many challenges this extraordinary man would face, a man who was born in 1837 on the frontier and who died in 1926 in the Jazz Age, a life that spanned an American century, a man who made an American icon, a bridge that has not only served New York's commuters and tourists and lovers for nearly a century and a half, but has also inspired poets and painters and photographers from Hart Crane to Georgia O'Keeffe to Walker Percy. There it is. But who was this man? And why do I care about him so much? I want to show you. I want you to care too, so I need you to know what an unprecedented feat of engineering the Brooklyn Bridge was, the first suspension bridge with cables made of steel, a bridge with a span that would not be exceeded, significantly exceeded, for 50 years, and a bridge built using a dangerous new technology, one that Washington pioneered at great cost to himself. He had taken over the project after the death of his father, John Roebling, a famous engineer who had bridged Niagara Falls and the Ohio River in Cincinnati. At the time, many people thought that to bridge the East River was impossible. But if any man should be the man to accomplish that feat, well, John Roebling was that man. And then one day, in the summer of 1869, before any real work had been started, before very many plans at all had been made, John Roebling suffered what seemed to be a minor accident down by the river. But before 2 weeks had passed, he was dead, a horrible death from tetanus, and it was left to his son to take over the work. Washington had built bridges for the army during the war, and he had supervised the work on his father's Ohio Bridge. Yet for all his expertise, he had always been his father's lieutenant. John Roebling, at 63, had been a vigorous man, but John Roebling was no more. Here is the Brooklyn Tower of the Brooklyn Bridge under construction in 1872. The bridge's towers are set on foundations deep beneath the river, foundations sunk using caissons, great chambers set on the river's bed. Inside these chambers, hundreds of men dug out sand and stone while blocks of granite and limestone were piled up on top. A caisson is launched like a ship from a dock, an upside-down ship, and that's the Brooklyn caisson before launching on March 19, 1870. And this, there. This is Washington's drawing of the inside of a caisson set on the river's bed, showing how it works. Those are the men digging down towards the bedrock. You can see the shafts, which pump compressed air into the chamber and allow waste material to be taken out. The roof is made upon layer of dense pitch pine. What's it like to work in compressed air? It's like diving under the ocean. The compressed air of the caisson keeps the river out, but come up too fast, and that dense atmosphere gets you very sick indeed. In the 21st century, this is called decompression sickness. But in the 19th century, when, thanks to projects such as the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, its symptoms began to appear, it was called caisson disease. Sometimes it's also called the bends. Nitrogen bubbles in the blood cause agonizing pain, paralysis, and sometimes death. But that was only one of the dangers faced in this great work. The roof of the caisson, remember, was made of wood. And one day in 1870, deep beneath the water, the wooden roof of the caisson caught fire. In the Roebling archives at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Washington's alma mater, is a remarkable document. It is a note written first in pencil, then crossed out and rewritten in ink in a hand that is still almost completely legible, despite the passage of time, despite the haste in which it was composed. Accidents is the heading, and then there's just one word: fire. Throughout his life, Washington Roebling would write on any available scrap of paper, on the back of old stationery, on old bills and random slips. This is one, evidence both of attention and exhaustion, of the need to keep every detail in his mind. It reads now almost like a kind of urgent poetry. Several small fires, leaks in seams, a caulking of oakum catches easily, some easily put out, had to flood caisson, danger of doing it, increased caution, water pipes, hose, steam hose from outside, fire on night of December 1st, candle pointing with cement, bad place would not be seen, burnt appearance, living coals, no smoke, risks, ultimate decision, 1,350,000 gallons of water, fire not out, till roof reached. On the timber roof of the caisson, the tower would rest. If the towers were to fail, all would fail. Everything could have been lost thanks to a moment's carelessness. Washington carefully considered what had caused the blaze. The immediate cause of the fire must be owing to a candle held in the right hand of the man who had his coat or dinner in a candle box, which was nailed up over the door close to the roof, he surmised. He could only reach the box by stepping up on a frame brace when he would hold a candle with his right hand and reach into the box with his left. He must have held the candle there at least a minute, Washington wrote. The man, the Brooklyn Eagle wrote, was called MacDonald. Once he had seen the hole burn through the wood, he filled it with plaster to conceal his blunder. He soon after disappeared and has not been seen since. But in the oxygen-rich atmosphere of the caisson, the wood behind the patch job kept burning. Living coals, as Washington described them. Buckets of water, carbon dioxide from fire extinguishers had no effect. A desperate remedy had to be tried. There was nothing for it but to flood the caisson from above. But such a plan was more than risky. If the air should all be out before the water had reached the roof, the result would be a sudden drop of the caisson and the destruction of all supports by the weight of 28,000 tons, besides running the risk of causing the caisson to leak so badly as to render reinflation impossible. Washington had never been a man to stay at his desk. The chief engineer was now 33 years old. He was down at the work site, down in the caisson, as much or more as anyone who worked for him. But now the hard work and, more crucially, the weight of responsibility began to take its toll on Washington. He had a team of assistants under him, but a decision such as this was his alone. All these considerations had to be carefully weighed, and the risks looked at from both sides before giving the order to flood the caisson. There was no intelligent mind to consult with, as all my assistants make it a point to live 3 miles away from this work so as not to be on hand in case of an emergency, he wrote with not a little bitterness. In the meantime, I had been down in the caisson for 7 hours and began to experience that peculiar numb feeling in the small of the back and lower limbs which precedes paralysis. Fireboats were called. 1,350,000 gallons of water were poured down through the caisson shafts, and the caisson remained flooded for 2.5 days. It settled by only 2 inches. When the water was eventually pumped out, the damage had to be painstakingly repaired, work of months. 11 courses of timber had been damaged. More pine was forced into the breaches, and iron straps were bolted to the roof. After those 7 hours down in the caisson, Washington had to be taken home and rubbed for an hour on the spine with salt and whiskey, a remedy I think we should try again. He had tried to rest, but at any moment expected to hear the doorbell ring with a message that the caisson was burning yet. He recovered enough clearly to write up his notes, whether it was the salt and whiskey which did the trick or just being away from the caisson, we don't know. We don't know if his wife, Emily, tended to him, or how much he would have seen of his 3-year-old son. What we can know is that Washington Roebling might call all this simply doing his job, but considering the strength of mind and feeling required to do that job is what draws us back into a room in a house in Brooklyn Heights, a room scented with smoke and whiskey, to find Washington back at his desk. There was still no end of solutions to be found. The construction of the Brooklyn Bridge took 14 years. During those years, Washington's health continued to worsen. The manner in which Emily Roebling came to the aid of her husband in the time of his illness is an astonishing story in himself. And there they are around the time of their marriage in 1865. When the bridge finally opened in 1883, there was a celebration such as the cities of New York and Brooklyn had never seen and perhaps have not seen from that day to this. But this remarkable story is only part of Washington Roebling's remarkable life. Washington has been my companion for 3 decades because I am inspired by his tenacity, by the strength of his spirit. If a problem was put in front of him, he would not rest until it was solved. His life was in many ways a privileged one, but it was also one marked by brutality and scarred by wars of more than one kind. Nevertheless, he persisted, always. When I have felt discouraged, he has given me courage. When I want to give up, he helps me to go on. I know that nothing can be done perfectly at the first trial, he once wrote. I also know that each day brings its little quota of experiences, which with honest intentions will lead to perfection after a while. Thank you.